Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Movies with My Cat. I'm Nathan. That's my pal Big Head there, just off camera. Well, I'm a middle-aged guy and I like Seinfeld. What a surprise. But what might be kind of surprising to you is that before Seinfeld turned its cast into TV legends, a lot of those familiar faces could be found hustling their way through somewhat unexpected territory. Low-budget horror, regional thrillers, even the kind of movies you might find tucked away in your dad's sock drawer. And once you start digging in, you realize just how many Seinfeld cast members dip their toes into the kind of movies we like to cover here at Movies with My Cat. Today we're going to look at a few of those. Now, Jerry Seinfeld himself was never in a horror movie before Seinfeld, but we know he likes watching them, as evidenced by his VHS copy of Arachnophobia and Child's Play 2 on his movie shelf there. But the other three principal cast members all dipped their toes into horror of some kind prior to their Seinfeld days. Elaine Benes, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, can be seen in the now classic 1986 fantasy horror Troll. She plays Jeanette Cooper, a resident of the building that's taken over by Turok the Wizard. And he proceeds to turn its inhabitants into various types of otherworldly beings. In Elaine's case there, she's turned into a nymph, who we see playfully twirling around in a one-bedroom apartment that we're supposed to believe is the Enchanted Woodlands. Now, this one is infamous amongst Seinfeld fans, especially those who wish they could have had a glimpse of Elaine's nip-slip Christmas card, because save for some strategically placed vines, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is briefly nude in this scene. And Turok certainly seems to be enjoying it. Then we've got Kramer, a.k.a. Michael Richards, playing a goofball butler named Fejos in 1985's Transylvania 6-5000. Now, I can see some calling this one a bit of a stretch because it's largely played for laughs. But I saw it at the theater as a kid. I don't remember anybody laughing. It does have a great cast, though. The plot has reporters Jeff Goldblum and Ed Begley Jr. sent to Transylvania by their boss, Mr. Roper, to look into Frankenstein sightings. So it definitely has some horror elements, especially with a few Universal monsters showing up. The setting is pretty spooky too. Transylvania 6-5000 was filmed in the former Yugoslavia and a centuries-old castle called Mokrese Castle. I'm sure that's wrong. So Transylvania 6-5000 is definitely a comedy, but it feels like a horror movie. And with the exception of that time Kramer couldn't get his tight jeans off, it's the closest Michael Richards ever got to horror. Oh, yeah.
No, drug call for it. Wait a minute, he's not going here, Jason. You're not funny. That's why you reset. Never had no show, never had no movie. Seinfeld, that's it. Oh, I guess you got me there.
That's a good point, Big Head. Jason Alexander, on the other hand, was in a full-on slasher classic with 1981's The Burning, an early entry in the genre of what I've heard called the summer camp slasher.
The Burning. Rated R. Now showing at a theater near you. Check newspaper for showtime.
Now, we know him as George Costanza, the neurotic, balding guy who sleeps under his desk at work and shoves clowns and the elderly out of the way to escape a fire. But in The Burning, he plays a funny and even confident teenager named Dave.
So, you girls all set for the trip tomorrow? Nothing I can get you? Life jacket? Spermicide?
Yeah, that's Costanza with a full head of hair. As Dave, he's a far cry from teenager Costanza, getting rear admiraled in the locker room. The Burning is a standout 80s slasher, despite not straying too far from the standard recipe of many early slashers. It involves a disfigured maniac roaming the woods, seeking out vengeance by offing teenagers at a nearby summer camp with a pair of gardening shears. Yeah, I guess it kinda is, with less blocks of cheese being eaten. Now, The Burning also features special effects by legendary effects artist Tom Savini, which does help elevate it beyond your average slasher. And it also has a pretty good cast, featuring early performances by Holly Hunter and Fisher Stevens. So that's the main cast. Now we're going to look at some of the supporting casts, including reoccurring characters and one-off bit players. When it comes to Seinfeld, sometimes those bit parts and one-off characters are some of the most memorable. For instance, if I said Marble Rye, most Seinfeld fans would immediately think of the elderly woman who tussles with Jerry when he tries to steal her marble rye loaf.
Shut up, you old pig!
That woman is Frances Bay. She started acting in the 1930s, and she's been in all kinds of films, including some great ones like David Lynch's classic Blue Velvet. But before Jerry called her an old bag and jacked her rye, she was in several pretty great horror movies as well. She was in 1980's The Attic, Nomads from 1986 with Pierce Brosnan. Not a horror movie, but she is the grandma in Happy Gilmore. She's also the creepy innkeeper who keeps her hubby chained up in John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. Frances Bay also had a part in Stuart Gordon's The Pit and the Pendulum. It was a small part, but another Seinfeld alum, Stephen Lee, a.k.a. Connie or Conrad, the carpenter who builds George's desk bed and Jerry's big-ass cupboards, had a substantial role in Dolls, another fantastic Stuart Gordon film.
You will discover something you've never been afraid of before.
They're alive, aren't they?
Dolls.
Pleasant dreams.
Another memorable one-off character from Seinfeld that had leading roles in some campy fun was Anthony Stark. Seinfeld fans will recognize him by the name Jimmy, more specifically, the Jimmy. Jimmy is a confident fella with a perplexing habit of referring to himself in the third person.
Check Jimmy out.
Jimmy down!
Anthony Stark starred in the sequel to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, which of course is Return of the Killer Tomatoes, and he did it alongside Mr. Cloontang himself, George Clooney. Now, he must have had a thing for horror spoofs because the Jimmy is in another one that some consider to be a classic in the genre, Repossessed. Now, if you haven't seen it, Repossessed is Linda Blair and Leslie Nielsen doing a comedic take on The Exorcist with the Jimmy playing the part of Father Brophy. And if you like Leslie Nielsen, you're going to like Repossessed.
Kumbaya, Malada, kumbaya.
Now we go from the Jimmy to the Sidler. The Sidler was a co-worker of Elaine's that had the uncanny ability to sidle up alongside her with absolute stealthiness. He was played by Brent Hinckley, who was in a spectrum of horror films before he was the guy on Seinfeld who walked around with Tic Tacs in his pocket. He was in cult favorites like Braindead and the dinosaur mayhem of Carnosaur, and he had smaller parts in some award-winning films like Silence of the Lambs and Jacob's Ladder, which, you may know, also features Costanza as a lawyer.
Why couldn't you make me an architect? You know I always wanted to pretend that I was an architect.
Jack Klompus. You know the name, Big Head? No, that's Krampus. Jack Klompus made a few appearances over several seasons as Morty Seinfeld's neighbor/frenemy. I think of him most as the guy that gave Jerry the space pin so he could write upside down in bed. Klompus was played by Sandy Barron, who you might remember from the 80s vampire classic Vamp. And that one he played Vic, the MC of the strip club with a bloody secret.
She's not much upstairs, but what a staircase. Gentlemen, the fabulous, the amazing.
As mentioned, these Seinfeld one-offs and bit parts often became the most memorable of the series. But perhaps none is more beloved, or at least more referenced, than that of the bit part played by Larry Thomas.
The soup Nazi.
Soup Nazi. You people have a little pet name for everybody.
But years before denying George his free bread, he was in 1980's Terror on Tour. Terror on Tour was an early entry in what some call metasploitation. Essentially movies that cashed in on the perceived inherent dangers of heavy metal and its ability to warp your brain and steal your soul. The late 80s were lousy with them, and they're all great. But as Terror on Tour was released in 1980, it's more about the perceived inherent dangers of wearing makeup on your face like Kiss was doing. A lot of parents worried about this guy. Terror on Tour concerns a band called The Clowns, who, not long after playing a town, have people go missing or turn up dead there. The band falls under suspicion, of course, and they don't exactly do themselves any favors by engaging in gruesome stage antics. The Clowns are played by a real band from Rockford, Illinois called The Names. Neither of those monikers conjure up fearsome heavy metal, but that's okay because the music's actually closer to Cheap Trick. Larry Thomas's role in Terror on Tour came about accidentally when he was just dropping his friend off at an audition for that film, when the director saw Larry and thought, he'd be good for the role of the band's manager. You can actually read about what Larry Thomas himself thinks of his acting in Terror on Tour, because he left an extensive comment on the movie's IMDb page. Long skinny, he's sorry if he sat through this, but he shouldn't be because it's fun. It's dumb fun, but it's fun.
Well, I'm going to go back and see if any of those chicks are still hanging around.
As fantastic as some of these one-off bit characters are, It's the recurring characters that often made an episode of Seinfeld so memorable. Right, what would Jerry be without his nemesis Newman, played by Wayne Knight? Unfortunately, previous to Seinfeld, he wasn't really in any of the kind of movies we cover, but he was in Jurassic Park, that's a great movie. But he did that the summer after his first appearance as Newman. Right, David Puddy, Elaine's on-again, off-again boyfriend. He's great, I love David Puddy. Love Patrick Warburton, who plays him. But it's the same kind of thing with him as it was with Newman, no pre-Seinfeld horror. His devil makeup was pretty scary that one time, though.
For the devils! The devils!
But otherwise, there's no David Puddy in this video. Oh, you're really upset about that, huh? I think I know what this is, though. Are you mad that we're not talking Puddy because you want to do your David Puddy impression? Now, you could still do it. Pretty good, I told you. Maybe next time, buddy. But Uncle Leo, he does warrant a spot in this video. Jerry's well-meaning, if not a bit overbearing, Uncle Leo was played by veteran actor Len Lesser. He's been in a ton of stuff, so it's not surprising that he has a fairly healthy pre-Seinfeld horror resume. He was a very effective dirtbag in 1971's Blood and Lace, the story of a teen that's forced to stay in the care of a sketchy orphanage. He's also great in Grandmother's House, where Uncle Leo plays another dirtbag, also while caring for recently orphaned siblings. This one is, in my opinion, probably the best of Len Lesser's pre-Seinfeld foray into horror, at least conventionally speaking. He's also in the surprisingly good, sort of Exorcist ripoff, Ruby from 1977. Ruby is a unique tale of mobsters meets possession. And spoiler alert, Uncle Leo's death in this is actually pretty good for, an Exorcist ripoff.
Get back to the car at once. But Mama, there's a dead body in the cold drink machine. No more horror movies for you.
But if you're into more adventurous, bottom-of-the-barrel cinema, like Big Head and I are, well, Len Lesser made his mark there too. Enter Sorority Girls and the Creature from Hell. It concerns a group of friends, some of them sorority girls, vacationing in a cabin. But instead of a fun and relaxing time, they end up dealing with not only an escaped convict on the loose, but also an uncle who's possessed by an ancient spirit. But that uncle is not Uncle Leo. Actually, Uncle Leo plays a pretty good guy in this. He's still pretty grouchy.
You kids got permission to be on these parts?
It's my uncle's cabin, all right. He said I could come here whenever I want.
Yeah? What do you say about disturbing the peace?
Tops are popped, pantaloons are dropped, and it's pretty much the kind of fun you'd expect from a movie called Sorority Girls and the Creature from Hell. Well, since we're mentioning Seinfeld family members, what about Jerry's parents? Were they ever in any pre-Seinfeld fun? Well, Liz Sheridan, who played Jerry's mom, the closest she got was a bit part in the mid-'80s action exploitation film Avenging Angel. It's not horror, but it's still pretty cult.
Well, someone's pulling your leg, dearie. Nobody dies on this floor unless they check with me first.
Jerry's dad, Morty, played by Barney Martin, the closest he got was an episode from the 80s revival of The Twilight Zone, and it was an episode directed by Wes Craven called Dealer's Choice. It's got an incredible cast that includes Morgan Freeman, Garrett Morris, M. Emmett Walsh, and it's a prime example of what I hear being called cozy horror, and it's incredible. Now, I know I said that we're just looking at stuff from actors before they showed up in Seinfeld, but before we move on from Barney Martin, I gotta mention a movie that he was in just after Seinfeld ended. The finale of Seinfeld aired in May of 1998. In October of that same year, UPN aired a made-for-TV sci-fi thriller called I Married a Monster, a remake of the 1958 movie I Married a Monster from Outer Space. Barney Martin shows up as a bartender in it. But somewhat incredibly, he's not the only Seinfeld alum there. Richard Burgi, who on Seinfeld played the doctor that declared everything to be breathtaking, and Susan Walters, better known as Mulva, were the stars of this thing. And it doesn't end there. Richard Hurd, who you'll recognize as Mr. Wilhelm, one of George's mini-bosses, he's there too. And just as an added bonus, the movie went ahead and threw in Tim DeZarn, the showerhead salesman who wouldn't sell Kramer and Newman the Commando 450. I Married a Monster is a breezy, effortlessly fun watch in the way that only a TV movie can provide.
We need to have a baby.
But while Barney Martin was never in any pre-Seinfeld horror, the first version of Morty Seinfeld was. If you're a hardcore fan, you probably know that Jerry's dad was initially played by a different actor who only appeared in one episode. His name was Philip Burns, and he had many roles long before his one and only appearance as Jerry's dad. One small but important role came in the 1972 proto-slasher Silent Night, Bloody Night. That important role was to be set ablaze, but it was important to the movie. He also played the part of the Doc in Return of the Living Dead Part 2. And if we look at George's TV dad, we see it's a very similar situation to Jerry's TV dad. While most of us remember the tightly wound Frank Costanza to be played by the incomparable Jerry Stiller, the first time we actually meet George's dad, he too was initially played by a different actor named John Randolph. And it was done in a much more subdued manner.
Anyway, I want you to pick up this big screen TV and deliver it to her.
Big screen TV.
You think you can handle it?
I want you to pick up this big screen TV.
Big screen TV.
And deliver it to her.
That was John Randolph's only appearance as George's dad. And Jerry Stiller is admittedly the superior Frank Costanza, but John Randolph was great in many of the other roles he played in his storied career, which sometimes did dip into the sci-fi world, like his turn as the commission chairman in both Escape from and later Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, and again as Captain Ross in the 1976 remake of King Kong. While George's and Jerry's first dads were one and done because the show recast them, Elaine's TV dad, Alton Benes, was one and done because he terrified everyone on the set. Stone-faced and radiating a quiet hostility, Alton was a character who seemed capable of violence because the actor playing him actually was. Alton Benes was played by Lawrence Tierney, and he appeared in the 1991 episode The Jacket. Tierney's on-set behavior during the filming of The Jacket was reportedly so intense that cast members were genuinely rattled by him. But to anyone following Lawrence Tierney's career, none of this would be entirely surprising. For decades prior, Tierney had been playing rough-and-tumble men in movies and television shows, but he was also known to be a real troublesome figure off-camera. I'm going to say old, to come up with a current example of a good comparison to who Lawrence Tierney would be like, but I want to say something like a Shia LaBeouf. I don't know. He's actually closer to like Oliver Reed or Gary Busey. Tierney had several well-publicized scrape-ups and could be pretty unpredictable on set. This was unfortunately mostly due to alcohol, and it would directly affect the trajectory of his career. But despite his troubles, he was still a force to be reckoned with as an actor in the early roles in crime noir films, of which he did plenty. But if we're talking fun, cult, horror, and sci-fi, Lawrence Tierney has done enough of that to have his own box set, starting with Naked Evil and Killer Without a Face in the late 60s. Then the 70s got weird with Tierney and Andy Warhol's Bad, and the telepathic plant thriller The Curlian Witness. The 80s didn't disappoint either, starting with back-to-back slashers Blood Rage and The Prowler, rolling right into the satanic panic of midnight. And then he was a tough bastard in Stephen King's underrated Silver Bullet. By the way, that movie set had both Lawrence Tierney and Gary Busey, so yikes. Then, in 1987, there's a fine anthology with From a Whisper to a Scream. Tierney then closed out the decade with the supernatural crime thriller The Horror Show. This pretty much takes us up to his appearance as Elaine's dad in the Jacket episode. And I'd say just in time, too, because if it's any indication where his career was at this point, this is Lawrence Tierney in another movie he filmed around the same time as Seinfeld in 1991. It's called The Wizards of the Demon Sword.
She's strong as an ox, and she makes love like a little bunny rabbit, don't you, dear?
Now, I can't say for certain that Tierney's turn as Alton Benes saved his career, but the following year he was cast in the Tarantino crime classic Reservoir Dogs. Of course, he took the first opportunity he had to try and ruin that too by squaring up with pretty much the whole cast. Lawrence Tierney wasn't the only actor to show up in a questionable film just before his appearance in Seinfeld. You'll recognize Ian Abercrombie as Justin Pitt, the hyper-particular aristocrat that Elaine is an assistant to, until, of course, she's fired for conspiring to try and take him out. But shortly before his first appearance as Mr. Pitt in the 1994 episode The Chaperone, he played Professor Dorn in a softcore sci-fi oddity called The Virgin Hunters. Pretty bad name. Luckily, the producers thought the name was a bit much too, so they toned it down to the far more conservative Test Tube Teens from the year 2000. Yes, that's way worse. Morgan Fairchild was a part of the ensemble, but she claims it was under false pretense. Director David Dakota didn't fully explain the degree of raunchiness this sci-fi comedy was going to wander into, and when it came out, at least in its uncut form, it was more than Morgan Fairchild had bargained for. Though I can't imagine she ever thought it was going to be a wholesome family fun type film.
I have been engineered to replicate the perfect physical specimen of man in every way.
In every way?
Get a load of this, sweet cake.
Ian Abercrombie, on the other hand, didn't seem to mind slumming it every once in a while, as even after doing his part in Seinfeld, he'd show up on a good time stinker like Jack Frost 2.
I thought we agreed last week that we're going to try and discuss something other than the Jack Frost.
But not every horror endeavor he made was of the D-list variety. Sometimes it was solid B-movie territory, like the third installment of Puppet Master, or the better-than-expected Catacombs. But sometimes the future Mr. Pitt wandered into horror and actually struck gold, with top-tier outings like the evil sorcerer classic Warlock, and the beloved cult favorite Army of Darkness. And since here we are on the subject of Seinfeld bosses, we already mentioned that Richard Hurd, aka Mr. Wilhelm, showed up in the post-Seinfeld TV movie I Married a Monster. But he was actually in a few other pretty solid TV movies before Seinfeld, like the acclaimed early 80s alien invasion TV miniseries V. He was also in the 1978 Killer Bee movie Terror Out of the Sky. And he later shows up as a cop in the early slasher Schizoid.
Lock your windows. Bolt your doors. Schizoid.
Then there's Mr. Kruger, George's boss at Kruger Industrial Smoothing. He's played by Daniel von Bargen, who's done a bunch of character acting. Often that character is a cop of some sort. He was in Stephen King's Thinner as a cop. He was a SWAT cop in Silence of the Lambs. He was a cop in Basic Instinct, and he did that alongside actually Newman as a cop. When he himself wasn't playing a cop, he was helping a cop, a robot cop, in RoboCop 3. But he was also pretty good in non-cop roles. He's incredible as a cult leader in Clive Barker's Lord of Illusions. By the way, Danny Woodburn, aka Mickey to Seinfeld fans, makes a very brief appearance as a forensic photographer. There it is, see? While Elaine and George both went through several bosses over the course of the series, the closest Jerry ever got to having a boss was Russell Dalrymple. Dalrymple was the president of NBC when Jerry and George were given a chance to write a show for the network. He's also the guy that fired Jerry and George after they got caught ogling his daughter, so that's definitely a boss. Russell Dalrymple was played by Bob Balaban, a guy who was in some legit classics before Seinfeld. He has a substantial role in Encounters of the Third Kind, and he's also in the cult favorite Altered States. Bob Balaban was also directing long before his role in Seinfeld, both for TV and film. He seems to have a thing for horror comedy, or at least dark humor, as he's shown as director to Parents, a suburban cannibal story starring Dennis Quaid. He also did the early 90s teen horror comedy My Boyfriend's Back. Alright, I guess we'll end it there because, Seinfeld's just one of those shows that went on for so long and used so many background characters that, where would it end if we just didn't end it here? Probably not. I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. By the way, if you like these kinds of movies and you just want to see compilations, themed compilations, let's call it, I have a new channel called Real Gassed, and it's literally just collections of things like news reporters, delivering bad news, and people dancing in horror movies and cult movies, all werewolves. Go check my channel out. Again, it's called Real Gassed if you like that kind of stuff. Otherwise, thanks a whole bunch for hanging out with us again, and we'll see you on the next episode of Movies with My Cat.